Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Good evening. This is BBC2.
In its 60-year lifetime, BBC2 has always been a rather humble channel. From its botched opening night in 1964 to where it sits now in the 2020s, BBC2 remains a fond favourite to those who grew up with it, and continues to showcase interesting programmes that you wouldn't necessarily find on any of the other mainstream channels. It's rarely been the biggest thing on the telly, except for one night, when in 1985, a sporting event would give BBC2 the greatest night in its entire history. To set the scene, let's go back first to the 1960s, a time of great change and revolution in almost every aspect of British life. Television was now fully coming into its own, with millions of households now owning a set in the corner of their living rooms. All sorts of programmes could be seen, including of course a variety of sport, much of which would draw huge audience figures. But one sport that rarely, if ever, got a mention on telly throughout much of the 60s was snooker.
This is the way the shot is made, making a cannon.
And then, of course, you proceed to make the cannon, all done by kindness and a few years of experience.
Originally conceived in the late 1800s, snooker had largely been viewed as a gentleman's game, and it wasn't until the dawn of the 60s where it really started to become more accessible to the average Brit. People were taken with the game, and its popularity steadily began to rise. Meanwhile, at the BBC, things were also beginning to change. Having launched BBC2 in 1964, by 1967, more and more parts of the UK were able to receive the new channel, providing of course they had a 625-line UHF television set to go with it. But as uptake steadily grew, the BBC implemented a brand new feature to BBC2, one that promised to not only boost its popularity, but to change how we view television forever. And that feature, of course, was colour. Colour television exploded onto UK screens in the summer of 1967. Of course, it was only accessible on BBC2, and if you had a television set capable of receiving colour broadcasts. Some of the first colour programmes contained sports coverage, particularly of that year's Wimbledon tennis tournament, where eager Brits could gather at shop windows to see the game unfold before their very eyes. In glorious colour, hardly believing the grass of the court was even green. But in these early days of colour broadcasting, it wouldn't have been enough to merely start filming existing black and white programmes in colour, for there had to be certain shows that really showed off the benefits of the new advancement. The controller of BBC2 at the time, David Attenborough, yes, that David Attenborough, decided in 1969 that a certain sport would be highlighted on BBC2 that would greatly benefit its new colour schedule. That sport, naturally, was snooker.
Very neat, very impressive.
For those who are maybe unfamiliar, snooker consists of two players going head-to-head, aiming to pot the various coloured balls on the table, each of them holding a different point value. By the time the final black ball is potted, the game is over, and the player with the most points takes the frame. Simple, yet addictive to watch, and really fun to play. David Attenborough certainly thought so, and in 1969, the show Pot Black debuted on BBC2. The series showcased 8 players battling it out for the title, the knockouts occurring just after one frame having been played. Sure enough, Attenborough's instincts were correct, and viewers adored the new programme. For a time, it was the second most popular programme on BBC2, only behind Morecambe and Wise, and that's still with much of the audience watching it in black and white, which of course led to the very famous phrase,
"For those of you in black and white, it's the green over that bottom pocket that he's looking at."
That was a huge success. Nobody had been able to do it before because all the balls looking grey.
Showcasing the game of snooker in all of its technical glory helped not only BBC2 as a growing channel, but the game of snooker as a whole. As the 60s morphed into the 70s, more and more people were taking an interest in and playing snooker, with more and more tournaments following, both professional and amateur, springing up all across the UK. Pot Black would continue year on year, building its already strong audience and introducing more snooker professionals to the country. Names such as Steve Davis and Dennis Taylor. More on those two in just a moment.
Then they smash them all to bits. They are clearly a most primitive people.
For mash, get smash.
By the time colour television sales outpaced black and white units, the year was 1976. Not only had much of the nation converted to colour, but snooker was continuing to rise in popularity, both amongst those who actively played and those who tuned in on the TV. Pot Black was still airing on BBC2, but things were about to be taken one step further when it came to snooker on the television. In 1977, the World Snooker Championships, the most prestigious event in the sport, was held at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield, where it has remained ever since. The following year, in 1978, marked the first time that the World Snooker Championships would receive daily coverage on the BBC, rather than sporadically or once a week. With daily coverage now firmly embedded on the nation's screens, snooker began rising to what many cite as the apex of its popularity. By the turn of the 80s, watching the World Snooker Championships became a regular fixture for millions of households. Certain players were well known, including the aforementioned Steve Davis and Dennis Taylor, and it's their story which would make snooker and television history.
Well, now it's back to Sheffield, where David Vine brings us up to date on the World Professional Snooker.
A very good evening and welcome to the beginning of another night here at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield.
The year is 1985, and once again, players and audiences flocked to the Crucible in Sheffield for that year's World Snooker Championships. The defending champion was Englishman Steve Davis, who had won the title in 1981, 1983 and 1984. Davis was known for his cool, calm and collected style of play, and is today often recognised as one of the greatest snooker players of all time. Beating many of his opponents with ease, Davis would once again cruise his way to the championship final. Dennis Taylor would be his opponent, someone who was also known to the British public.
Dennis Taylor making his debut and at the same time an in-off giving 4 points away.
The Northern Irishman had been playing for years, and even was runner-up on Pot Black for 2 years running in both 1975 and 1976. From the early 80s, he was perhaps best known for his distinctive glasses, which not only aided his eyesight, but had been specially designed for snooker play. And so it was that Taylor would be up against Davis, who himself by that point was a double Pot Black winner. Most odds were stacked against Taylor, but all would be decided on the green of the snooker table, as the final got underway.
Well, a perfect performance by Steve Davis. 8 frames to 0.
Things got off as perhaps many pundits probably predicted. Despite a decent first break, Taylor would lose all 7 frames of the first session, and the first frame of the second, trailing Davis 8 frames to 0. However, Taylor would win 7 of the next 8 frames, a shock turnaround considering Davis's strong lead. By the end of the first day, Dennis Taylor was only 2 frames behind the 3-time champion. The 28th of April marked the second day of the final, with 2 sessions left to play. The third session consisted of 8 frames, with both players winning 4 apiece. This left the total at 13 frames to Davis and 11 to Taylor. With the 4th and final session starting up, it was now or never. 10 frames later, the total was now 17 apiece. 1 more frame to play, and the winner of this would win the title. It was a scenario that absolutely no one had seen coming. It was now well past 11 PM. BBC2 would often be closing down at this point, but not tonight. It was going to continue to broadcast no matter what, and the millions watching at home were right there with them. How many millions? You'll find out shortly.
And so the lights go down. The players shake hands.
The match was tense, and by the time the final 4 coloured balls were left on the table, Steve Davis led at 62 points to Dennis Taylor's 44.
18 points in it, 22 points on the table.
Dennis Taylor, against all odds, could still win this and dethrone the man who at that time was largely viewed as being unbeatable. Firing from all the way across the table, Taylor was able to sink the brown ball. Then he sank the blue, and amazingly, even the pink ball.
The final frame the final black.
Only the black ball remained, worth 7 points. Taylor now had 59 points to Davis's 62. This one black ball meant the difference between winning and losing. World Championship snooker had arguably never been this close. Taylor took the shot and missed. Davis promptly lined his cue up, but given the black's position, he played it safe, aiming to leave it in a spot too difficult for Taylor to pot. The Northern Irishman would indeed not pot the black, and the back and forth continued for a while. Then, Dennis had a shot that would win him the title, but he missed.
That was the biggest shot of his life.
And so, it seemed that reigning champion Steve Davis would once again take the title, with a very straightforward pot. Except, he didn't.
No.
That missed opportunity was devastating, as Dennis Taylor lined himself up one final time and made history.
He's done it. Dennis Taylor, for the first time, becomes Embassy World Snooker Champion 1985.
Against all the odds, Dennis Taylor was able to win the 1985 World Snooker Championship. It's a moment that's gone down not just in snooker history, but sports history in general. What did this all mean for television? As mentioned, BBC2 was extending operations due to how long the fourth session was going on for. The final frame ended at around 20 past midnight on Monday the 29th of April. Normally at that time, if any television channels were still on the air, their viewership would be rather low. This was especially the case for a channel like BBC2, whose numbers would rarely meet the 10 million mark. However, given the popularity of snooker and the tense manner in which this final had played out, BBC2 recorded an audience of around 18.5 million viewers. That is staggering. During a time where programs recording over 10 million was seen as a strong success, for a sport such as snooker to pull nearly double that, way past midnight no less, was astonishing to say the least. And to this very day, 40 years later, it remains not only the most watched snooker match in history, but the most viewed BBC2 broadcast ever. And that's why this snooker final is not just momentous for the sporting world, but the television world in equal measure.
Over 18 million people tuned in to see Dennis Taylor lift the trophy. Still, the highest ever viewing figure for that time of night on any channel.
If this was the peak of snooker's popularity, it rode that wave for as long as it could. The sport would continue to see yearly coverage on the BBC, and the players continued to build on their household name status, even releasing a novelty single with Chaz and Dave in 1986, one that has gone on to find an endearing place in fans' hearts ever since. It's, of course, Snooker Loopy.
Snooker Loopy, that's our way, we're all Snooker Loopy.
These days, snooker may not be anywhere near as popular as it once was, but it still maintains a strong and loyal following. The World Championships continue to be played out at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield every single year, and is a staple for the venue and city's calendar. You may not recognise as many professional players these days, but amongst the everyman, snooker continues to be a popular sport, played by all kinds of people not just in Britain, but all over the world. And for BBC2, it still continues to trundle along today, celebrating 60 years in 2024. Both the sport and the channel may not be as big as they once were, but they both made their impact on their respective worlds. And when they came together, particularly for that magical moment in 1985, it provided those 18.5 million audience members with a night of television that they would never forget.
He's done it!
Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Liam Domain, AJ Mac 200017, Jen, Traffy, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Evan Hart 42 Radio, Tim Ripley, 40-something Manchild, Mr. J McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Stephen Oliver, Shadow Fiend 180X, Swan Ronson, Adam Gamer, Sir Fonzie Daz, Matthew Elif, Pigeon's House, Seraphic Euphoria, Dave Batten, Kevin Mallon, Shah H, Liam Turner, Jenny T, Lovely Dave and Gem, Tyler McLean 316, NJ on DT84, Jimmy the Bantam, and the Macabre Tavern are AMTV staff members.